Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll get started in just a second here. Just want to make sure that everything is set up. Let's see, folks get trickling in on the comments. Hey there, Milton. Thank you for joining us today. Awesome. Looks like we're in a good spot to get started. I just want to welcome everyone for joining us here today for a conversation with ATL Black Tech. For those of you who don't know who we are a collective of Black tech professionals, entrepreneurs, educators, and ecosystem builders driving innovation, access, and equity across Atlanta's tech landscape. We host quarterly debates, community dinners, and mastermind gatherings that bring together dope people to have real conversations, challenge the status quo, and co-create solutions across the K-20 education ecosystem, the tech workforce development ecosystem, and the startup ecosystem. We don't just build tech, we build community, capacity, and culture. Thank you for joining us for today's debate between dope people. Last quarter, I was actually a panelist for our last debate focused on Black-owned versus best-in-class, and it was a great and honest conversation about the types of businesses that we support. But today, I'm really excited about a provocative conversation about the past, present, and future of tech education for Black youth. Today's central question is one we don't ask aloud often, but here we are. Did we do it wrong? Was the movement to get kids into coding a waste? Let's rewind back to 2010. The tech industry was booming, the demand for software engineers was skyrocketing, and yet the representation of Black technologists remained critically low. And in response, organizations like Black Girls Code and countless grassroots initiatives launched to close that gap. Funders poured millions into boot camps, after-school programs, and curricula, all focused on teaching our kids to code. But fast forward to 2025, despite these efforts, Black professionals still make up only 5% of the US tech workforce and just 3% of software engineers. At the same time, the landscape is shifting. AI is automating entry-level coding work, tech layoffs are real, and the pathways to wealth are changing. So today we ask, what do we achieve? Do we aim at the right target? And what should we be building toward now? We're bringing together a group of dope people, educators, innovators, strategists, and system leaders who can help us make sense of it all. So without further ado, I'd love to offer some quick introductions of our panelists. These are some great folks that I've been able to connect with throughout this process in our masterminds, but then also in this debate. I'll also just give a quick disclaimer that while they represent some really dope organizations, please be advised that our panelists are representing the thoughts of their own. So without further ado, I want to kick it off with John Exume, a product leader and fractional CTO with deep roots in education and entrepreneurship. John brings a visionary perspective on how Black youth can not just catch up, but lead and innovate in tomorrow's tech. We have Tiffany Jones, a K-12 educator and STEM ambassador for the U.S. Department of Defense. Tiffany's in classrooms every day, and she sees the real gaps and real opportunities that our kids face. Next, we have Christina Newton, founder and pipeline builder for underrepresented girls in tech. With a background in engineering and consulting, Christina is redefining what readiness looks like for Black girls in tech. Brian Cox is an education systems leader who works directly with districts to bridge the resources divide. He's got the numbers and he knows the policy and funding realities that shape outcomes. And lastly, we have Erica Moore, an executive and equity strategist in STEM and philanthropy. Erica is all about moving from talk to transformation, especially when it comes to funding and system change. So without further ado, let's get straight to it. I have the first question for each of you all, and I'll start with John. But essentially, I want to know your perspective in terms of your angle on this debate. In terms of your work in the education ecosystem, do you feel like we did it right? Are we on the wrong? Excuse me. Oh, I thought you were about to say something. But yeah, do you feel like we did it wrong? Are we on track, or are you somewhere in the middle? And can you share why?
Well, hello, everyone. Again, my name is John Exume. My stance on this is I feel that we partly got it wrong. And why I say that is, the work that we do. So my organization, we're in the workforce development space. We spend a lot of time teaching kids how to code and teaching folks how to become software developers, things like that. But I feel that we failed on the science of it all, like learning about data structures and algorithms. What we're seeing, especially right now in this day and time, is tons of layoffs. But also there is a race to get the best possible talent to build things for companies. Part of what we've found and in conversations with companies is that they're looking for that, person that can help them build something, that one or two person team that can build something. But then they're laying off teams of people because the level of talent they're looking for is more folks on the science side instead of just the development side. So my stance is I feel that we've got it wrong.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that perspective there. Up next, I'd love to pass it over to Tiffany Jones. What angle do you have on this debate?
So, hi everyone, Tiffany Jones. I am a cybersecurity and computer science educator. So, I'm kind of in the middle. So, I'm like, yes and no. We can't just teach students to code to say we did it to check a box. The real issue here is, did we scaffold the ecosystem around our students, Black students, so they could do more than just code? Did we build spaces for them to create, question, and essentially own the future of tech? So I think that we're heading in the right direction, but there's still more work to do.
Love it. Thank you so much there, Tiffany. Up next, I'd love to ask Christina where your stance is on the debate.
Good afternoon, y'all. So yeah, I'm Christina. I'm the founder and executive director at Hype. I'm a software engineer by trade, and I think that we got it wrong. I think that we focused a lot on the skills, the certificate, the job that existed at that time, and we left behind the person. We left the student that was going to need to get this skill behind. We left the process behind, and we focused so much on getting something done really quickly, a microwavable result, when that's not actually how we got to where we were as leaders. And it's not the way or the pathway to getting the next generation to where we want them to be as leaders who are prepared for anything that comes their way.
I love that. Thank you so much, Christina. Next, I have Brian.
Good afternoon, everybody. Brian Cox. I'm at the Constellation Center for Education and Computing at Georgia Tech. And I think we're doing a pretty good job. I don't say we got it right, because I think the education system as a whole has a lot of holes in it. A lot of holes that have nothing to do with tech whatsoever, right? That have everything to do with things like poverty or race or gender, things like that. I think those are some of the challenges that are still pervasive in everything that we do. But tech has always been, the goal of tech has always been to solve problems in the human society. That's always been the goal. Programming, coding as it is one skill that helps us move towards that. And it's a skill that we'll still be leveraging and using as we continue to solve problems in our society. So making sure that our students have that skill is important, but making sure that they understand that that skill is just one aspect of what they need in order to go out and solve problems. They also need to be able to collaborate with each other. They also need to be able to envision what the problems are in our society. If all our problems are just about to get a job in tech to make money, we're in the wrong space, right? Our jobs have to be, our focus has to be about solving larger communal problems and problems in our society. So I think we're in the right space, we're moving in the right direction. I think we have a lot of work to do, though, to really maximize what we're able to accomplish with our students.
Love it. Yeah, thank you for that approach there. Lastly, but not leastly, Erica, where do you stand?
I'm actually going to piggyback a little bit off of Brian's comments. So first, hello to everyone this afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I believe the champions, the educators, those who have been committed to students have all been getting it right and continuing to try and involve that process. The places where we've gotten it wrong are definitely with the systems, not paying attention to the inhibitors, not paying attention to the social determinants, and since I'm representing this community, not funding the change in those systems. So as a result, we see, as you presented at the beginning, Colin, the numbers that we still have that are still very pervasive, but those are the results, right? We have to go back to the systems. Someone put in the comments, the processes, right? All of those things needed to be enacted differently. They needed to be funded differently and with equity in mind. And those are the parts that we got wrong. And we will continue to see the effects of that. So that's the part where there is still a void. And that really got, put on full display during COVID. Not that the problem was created, the problem already existed, but it was exacerbated and was actually made very visual to those who hadn't been paying attention to it during that time frame.
I love that. Thank you so much, Erica. So in the comments, I'd love for you all to do two things. One, if you have any questions or anything that might come up, we will have a Q&A section towards the end of this. In addition to that, I want you all to join the conversation as well. Share your stance. Do you think we did it wrong? Are we on track? Or are we somewhere in the middle? And we'd love to revisit that towards the end of this conversation. So first, I'd love to kind of kick off with a few questions that I have curated for our conversation. I'll start with John, kind of just circling back to you here. You work with founders and product teams at the cutting edge. Given what you know about where the tech economy is heading right now, was the focus on teaching kids to code just too narrow, or should we have been preparing them for something else in this meantime?
So from my perspective, I believe in the beginning it was too narrow. We mainly focused on, coding and just learning how to code to build something, but we didn't prepare them for, like, case in point, if you learn how to code, how to become an entrepreneur. So like one of the things that we find, especially with a lot of founders, especially for me being a fractional CTO at times, is, founders come to us with a problem that they want to solve, but they have absolutely no clue in terms of how does the development process or how the actual process works in order to solve that solution. And so what I feel that we did wrong is we made it very narrow instead of sort of making it more broad in terms of learning the science behind what it does. I think we just focus on the task of teaching kids how to code. And once we accomplish that, many of us thought that, the job was done. But as we can see in today's day and time with the economy, we're seeing a lot of companies lay off developers, and they're focusing mainly on people who have the science behind how to create, especially we're now in the world of AI, and I don't want to jump, too far ahead into the topic here, but we're noticing massive layoffs and people who have skills and talent that can't find jobs, right? And that the job economy has shifted to more folks, focused on this person that has sort of a science background that can help build this thing for companies. And so that's been just like looking at the landscape of how things has been happening. That's been, a big part of the challenge.
I love that coming from the perspective that you mentioned earlier on your stance that we're not necessarily working in the right direction. Just to kind of make sure that we keep a kind of solid, well-rounded perspective there, Brian, I'd love to kind of turn the question over to you and kind of see what response you might have there to John's kind of understanding of like this really deeper problem of us helping these students understand not only the systems behind it, but the logic and science as well behind coding to be able to help them be the most prepared.
Well, thank you. First, I want to respond to what John was saying about these layoffs. We always go through ups and downs of laying people off. That's a capitalistic approach, right? That has nothing to do with where we are right now. After the big boom in the dot-com boom, there was a whole bunch of layoffs then. There'll continue to be a whole bunch of layoffs as long as it's profitable to move people away and move back to processes that make more profit for the company. That'll continue to happen. So I agree with the fact that we need to lean into the entrepreneurship thing and into the science aspect of it, because then people have more purpose in what they do. But in the school system, we definitely have leaned into more computational thinking, especially at the younger grades, where the students are learning to problem solve with thinking about what the problems are that they want to go and solve. The coding has always been just a skill to move towards that, and it'll continue to be a skill to move towards that. As you see the companies that are laying folks off and the folks that are keeping on the folks with the science, they still know how to program, and they have to know how to program. AI isn't supplementing them; it's becoming a complement to what they do. So you still need those skills. What the danger is that as we start moving folks away from coding and into AI, you're going to move our students and our young people, the Black kids, away from the necessary agency to make and shape the society. They still have to have those skills in order to shape society, even if they're not going to go work for, your Fortune 500 company, because those companies are always going to look for a way to make profit. And the easiest way to make profit for them is to lay folks off, right? So they still need this coding skills. They just got to apply them to their own problems and the problems that they see that they can solve.
I love that. Thank you so much for that, Brian. You also mentioned when you opened up just this idea of the focus on helping solve real problems. And, Tiffany, you had mentioned that you're kind of in the middle there. And I love from your perspective in the classroom, Are we giving the students these foundational problem solving and creative skills, or are we stuck on syntax and are we not necessarily on the right target there?
So I think in the classroom, we're doing a good job of letting students know that coding doesn't necessarily equal a tech career. So there's this big assumption that exposure to just coding alone creates access or pipelines into tech. So it really ignores the systems of power, the hiring bias, the economic barriers, the lack of social capital. So really getting students to think about the whole ecosystem and everything that impacts that. Another thing from a classroom perspective is teaching them that tech readiness doesn't necessarily equal software savviness. So we cannot just prepare our Black youth only for entry-level coding. That's insufficient. We have to teach things like cybersecurity, adversarial thinking, AI ethics, systems engineering, and also tech infrastructure. There's also a huge lack of cultural and capital recognition. So when we think about the teach every kid to code movement, it often lacked culturally responsive pedagogy. It left out Black creativity, resilience, and leadership. Those things were never centered. So, from my viewpoint, we're at the 21st century Washington versus Du Bois parallel. So, from the Washington stance of this whole workforce pipeline logic, which is telling kids digital trades, job readiness, and then the Du Bois standpoint of visionary leadership. So, shaping that system through critical thought and tech ownership. So right now, I think the systems that are in place are training laborers for someone else's system, not architects for our own. And I think that's where the shift has to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'd love to open that and just like in response to that for all of the panelists we have here, definitely would love any of you to jump in. But are we, in a space right now where we're either creating and owning that right now, or is there still work to be done on setting up these systems?
I think there is still work to be done. And I want to kind of go back to even the mandate of teaching kids, like all kids or all youth, how to code. That likely came from industry because industry wanted talent to push their agenda, to push their profit, to make them the first, to get to a certain place as technology grew. So to Erica's point, that's where the money, the funding, came from. And I think that most of us on this call likely care about, again, like the individual, the process, understanding that we can't create coders overnight, especially young Black youth who have other systemic like challenges and barriers. We understand that, but again, that's not where the money resides, right? And people are going to follow the money. And so if the funding is going to say, hey, I want in 12 weeks a group of coders who can come and create a new app, create their own product, whatever, then that's what we did, right? We responded. We're always responding. We're always responding to what someone who does not have our best interest in mind puts out there. And so when I say there wasn't the time put in thinking about why does this mandate exist, and how can we prepare our students for today, not for and for let me say, I want to say today, how can we prepare our students today for the future, for what industry saw in the long term, not for today, as in like directly today or tomorrow, right? So how can we start investing more time and energy in our youth? And so those systems weren't in place. And I'll even say a lot of the entrepreneurs, a lot of like Black entrepreneurs who did get tech skills, start a company, build something, that's all great. But I think a lot of us who did that also did it for ourselves. How many jobs are they creating? How many, youth are they bringing with them? And so the challenge and the chasm between the haves and the have not is going to continue to grow because we're not taking the time to invest in our youth.
I love that. Thank you so much for that insight there, Christina. I know I kind of opened it to all, but Erica, I'd love your perspective too from the philanthropy side and what you see with a lot of folks that are investing this. Is it still necessarily the same where it's like focused on demand generation, or is there, a different perspective that you're seeing based off of the conversations you're having with funders?
So I always try and break philanthropy into its parts because there's a tendency to make it an aggregate. And the reality is, if you're talking corporate or if you're talking private family, they're two different perspectives and thus two different responses to your question, Colin. I would say from a corporate standpoint, it's still very much similar to what Christina just outlined, right? In terms of how does this impact our particular organization? What are we doing to impact our bottom line, the ROI as it relates to our specific organization versus a broader perspective? Now, granted, there are always, anomalies and outliers, and thus there are organizations that look at it from a K through 16 versus just a post-secondary perspective. But more generally speaking, for that bucket, it's still aligned to, like I said, how Christina just aligned, right? But other spaces where there's broader hope and opportunity for those who are looking at it systemically, right? And looking at the systemic changes that need to happen and how they can support that are really more in the vein, quite honestly, of your private family philanthropies. One, because they look at it from a legacy perspective. They're not looking at it in a short term. They're looking at it from a multi-generational, and not just for, and some of it is, yes, very personal to them, right? Legacy, their name, personal, right? But also legacy, multi-generational in terms of economic mobility. And that's the place where I would say, Colin, thankfully, there are more conversations in that vein. Still not enough. Absolutely not enough. And, for those who know, Janelle Williams, right, with Kindred Futures, was just at a session with her, and she had a great quote. She was like, we can't program our way out of this, and we cannot, right? There are phenomenal programs that exist both in the education sector, both from a nonprofit perspective, but it does require what I'm always going to call out, policy. It does require a shift in funding. And like all three of those have to be in play to make the actual changes that need to happen towards where the conversation is going right now, right? Looking at it from let's not look at it as let's get them to a job perspective, but let's get them to the point of computational thinking, analytical thinking, critical thinking. What are all the ways that we need to be in play to bring that to fruition? I'll say this and then I'll hush. One of the most amazing things Brian did when he was still working for the state was helping the Board of Education understand, look, this isn't just from a CS role. This threads into a history teacher needs to pick this up, an English teacher needs to pick this up. Like everybody needs to be working in the same ecosystem and in the same and synergistically for this to work the way we want it to work, relative to the point that Christina made earlier, relative to the student at the end of the day. So I gave you a lot of different answers. I apologize.
No, the gems are magic.
They're all pieces that are interdependent. So I apologize.
I love it. Thank you so much for being so clear and intentional about how you kind of broke out the differences, because I think that's really important for us to also consider in this type of conversation. I'd love to also kind of shift gears a little bit to kind of really hone in on the problem. And Christina, I'd love to kind of start with you, because you mentioned, you're in the kind of stance that we're not necessarily working the right track. But we'd love to just kind of target this question to you at like, what point do you think we got it wrong? And just want to kind of see, like, was it like any assumptions or anything that we came out with in the outset that you think we should have probably done differently?
Yeah, I think we got it wrong almost immediately. Once the mandate was put out, I think we started rushing to try to do the thing that they're asking us to do. But if you think about it, we're talking about tech, we're talking about engineering, we're talking about problem solving and critical thinking. We teach our students, when the problem is presented in front of you, you don't go straight to typing the code on, right? You sit down and you think about all of the elements, and the components. And I don't think we took time to do that. Mm-hmm. Again, I think with it, I don't come from the education background and system, so I don't know, but I would assume that inside like your schools and your school districts, when they're getting this mandate, there are metrics that they are rated on. So now they're trying to, catch up and keep up and do, within a year, 6 months to a year, what again, industry or government has kind of for them. And I think now we're trying to course correct. I think we're in a place where we see when COVID occurred, like what we actually, did and how it didn't work for everyone equitably. And so we're trying to course correct. But, I think it's unfair that what a lot of us did, learn, even believe and had to go through to be where we are today. Now we're telling our students, don't worry about that. We're saying, do as I say, not as I do. Like we took the time to learn, to go to school, to be mentored. We took the time to understand fundamentals of mathematics and science, and now algorithms, all of those things. And now we're telling the next generation that's actually not so important. And I just don't think it's true.
I love that. Brian, I see you're also active in the chat, so definitely keep the great conversations going. But we'd love to turn that over to you, considering that you think that we're on the right track, or at least, headed towards progress in a positive way. Do you see anything that happened wrong at the outset, or what do you think we might have gotten right at the outset?
I think at the outset of this, there was constantly a conversation, and sometimes it was an equity conversation, but sometimes it was a broad conversation that people that were not currently being included needed to be included, right? So we were always moving in that direction, that there are voices that are not at the table. How do we get those voices to the table? And sometimes that gets lost in the for all, and we forget the for each and every. But I also recognize that there are two things going on here, right? We live in two different worlds, we live in two different societies, and we're always having two different conversations, and we need to remember that, right? We want to live in a space where community is the focus, where the best things for the students and for the community are the goal. But we also live in a space where capitalism is the ecosystem that we live in. So we want to tell ourselves, yeah, we need to get these kids to follow their passion and follow their dream. And then on the other side, it says, they need to get this job and make this money. And both of those things can be true, but they both don't need to be complementary, right? Yeah. So you can, want to get this coding skills and get these jobs in the tech ecosystem, but that's not necessarily going to help your community. And it's not going to help the next person behind you that also needs to learn some skills that's going to, benefit them. So I think there are two different things going on. There are some things we did right when we want to include the students that are being left out. But there's some things that are going wrong in the fact that we still have a large swath of students that are marginalized in a bunch of different ways that have nothing to do with tech. Again.
I love that. Thank you so much for that context. And I see that John and Tiffany were nodding a bit here. I'd love to kind of see if you all have any responses to that as well. Oh, I'm sorry, you might be on mute, Tiffany.
No, I'm nodding in agreement. I'm just nodding in agreement.
Gotcha.
And I think from a school system perspective, we just have to all send that unique message, because when students are going through, these pathways, it's always push for the certification. And now with changes happening in technology and in the landscape, a lot of students are getting discouraged. They're like, well, why should I take this computer science class? AI is going to take all the jobs, this, that, and the third. And just that real focus of transferable skills, that you're learning problem solving skills. Someone has to train the AI. So they're going to be the jobs are going to still exist. So really getting them to understand just kind of decomposition, algorithmic thinking, the skills, and getting them to understand that they're really preparing for the careers and the technologies that don't exist yet. I am very forward thinking and letting the students know that, hey, your business partners could be in this classroom with you today. You could come up with the next emerging technology. It's really this mindset shift of getting students to understand that they don't have to just be consumers of technology, and empowering them to be the creators of technology. And if you don't pour into them from that lens, they'll never see it that way.
I love that. Christina, you're actually developing a program that is focused on youth and specifically women. And when we look at those numbers of software engineers that are in tech, and specifically Black software engineers, those 5%, 3% numbers don't even double click down to those that are women. I'd love to hear your perspective on, whether or not you think that, this is something that, is something we can fix, or what are some of the things that you think we should be focused on in terms of making sure that we have more equity for our women software engineers, for people of color or Black folks that are in this space as well?
Yeah, I do think it's something that we can fix. Someone in the chat mentioned that like coding, we are not getting it wrong because coding is a starting point. But I think that what we are not doing, we are not creating the communities around youth. So we're starting, but we're not following up, we're not following through, we're saying off you go. And so what Hype does is we build communities, right? Like it's the foundation of who we are. We even say like we're not about teaching girls how to code. We're about empowering leaders for 21st century careers who not only teach and know what to do, but they're servant leaders and they're bringing the next generation behind them. So you join Hype, you already know that this isn't just about you getting a job, getting an internship, going to college, getting a scholarship. It's about how can you support the next group of Hype scholars who are going to join. We start with middle school students. When I first founded Hype, we were working just with high school students. And that's when I realized this is too late. It's kind of too late. So now we started with middle school students, and we make sure that they have multiple years of community, multiple years of safe spaces to develop themselves, to develop their skills, to have mentorships, to fail, in a safe space with your people behind you, so that by the time they do go to college, they're in a good place. They understand I actually can do whatever it is that I put my mind to, because I've learned how to work hard over these past 4, 5, 6 years, engaging with Hype. I've connected with other women. I've learned about their journey. I understand that everything is not an overnight success. I understand that everybody can't be an influencer. I understand that there are like fundamental skills that are going to be necessary for me to be a leader. And I think that we're just not talking about that, because that takes time. That takes investment. That takes you actually even giving up some of yourself to really think about the next generation. And I'm at I don't want to preach, but I'm at a women's conference right now, and I think about like in the word it talks about how before you even set yourself to make a step to do the next thing, you need to count the cost. You need to think about what is it going to cost, what is it going to take, like what am I going to need to do to achieve what I have in mind. And we're not counting the cost, or when we do realize what it's going to take, we decide, you know what, like, that's actually that I don't want to put that amount of work in. And we're leaving this generation behind. And it's sad, it's unfortunate, but it can be corrected if we as leaders just take the time to invest in the next generation.
I love that. And definitely want to make sure that we do have time to kind of talk about some interventions and things that you all are either seeing or things you might propose towards the end of this conversation. But before we do that, I'd love to kind of zoom out a little bit, from in the classroom, in the school level, to more of the kind of macro level and what's currently going on in terms of policy right now. Erica and Tiffany both mentioned that you're on the side where you either are, on the fence, or that you feel like we're on the right track. But curious to know, what are things like the Big Beautiful Bill that was recently passed that's going to have impacts on the education ecosystem? Can you share a little bit of the impacts that might have in your respective spaces? Erica, I'd love to start with you. I wanted to key you up as well, Tiffany.
Yeah, so let me just state the obvious that I would never call it that, right? But I'm sure I'm in common company in terms of having a perspective about that. And want to take this more specific to like the Department of Education, right? And the dismantling that's happening and will continue to happen there. From the perspective of removing CTE, or for us here in Georgia, right, CTAE, and displacing it into like the Department of Labor, and taking loans and scholarship loans and and placing that, you know, in SBC, like the whole dismantling and the disruption, and quite honestly, what will now require a search warrant to find where these things exist and the processes that are associated with them, versus having it centralized. You know, at the end of the day, the things that happen at a state level already happen at a state level. So all the propaganda and all the misinformation around putting, you know, money and putting control back into the states already do that, right? And those who are in the states, they know that. Those who are in those spaces, they know that. So my encouragement to our group is to stay vigilant, stay aware, and quite honestly, for those who come to a status of being woke, if they stayed aware, that they wouldn't have to gain a status of being woke, because they would be paying attention to all the things that have always been happening around them. Again, including the misinformation, and right now what's happening in terms of the misuse of funds, right? In terms of where these dollars should go. I mean, we sit in a state that funds an educational system based on a lottery system that has a very, you know, specific population that engages in that lottery system to pay for a scholarship program that funds students who don't need scholarships, right? Like all of that is interwoven into the here and now where we are. I know that may sound messy, so let me clean it up a bit, right? The state scholarships that we have, you have to have 4 advanced or rigorous full credit hours to gain access to that funding. That's not a federal issue. That has nothing to do with the big bill. It has everything to do with decisions that have been made here in our own state. But how many students actually have access? And when you go look up the list, because the list is publicly available, they are AP courses, they are IB courses, they are courses that are denoted as advanced on the front of them. And then when you compare them to the curriculum that's actually being created and being made available and given access to our students, there's a misalignment there as to where those classes are positioned, as to where they're available. So we have to pay attention, right? When these decisions are coming forth, when our state legislators are making their decisions about what our educational system, and I go back to that, is going to look like, all of these pieces, parts are related, right? Because then someone will say, oh, you know, they can just take it online. Okay, at $500 a pop, sure. But you can afford a $500 class, right? So, neither can I. And I had to do it for one of my children, and just that was part of my budget was on hold for that month, right? So all that to say, we have to pay attention. We have to talk about it. We have to keep it on the table. It has to be a part of these debates and these conversations, because if not, we are missing critical elements that impact our students on a very daily basis. And it goes back to what I put up into the chat, and again, I'll hush. This is how we reproduce all the things that are happening in our culture that have been happening for years, right? This is how the inequities that have existed for years, long before any of us were even being thought about and a part of this conversation. This is how these inequities stay in play from a systemic perspective when we don't pay attention to, you know, and someone else gave a great quote. They said, the system is designed to do exactly what the system intended to do. I'll stop there.
I know that's a mic drop if I heard one. I love it. I love it. Brian, I also saw you nodding as well. And as we're having this conversation about the education ecosystem, I just wanted to cue you up as well. But Tiffany, I kind of already mentioned that I was coming to you from the high school kind of perspective and working with students in computer science. I would love your perspective as well.
Okay, so this is the point where I'm going to say these views and our opinions are my own. Okay, now, the reality of the situation is that from a government perspective, essentially, I feel that we just have a top-down misalignment. If you even look at like just a locality issue here in Georgia, in the metro Atlanta area, we acknowledge that we have an equity issue. But we have to make sure we put the proper scaffolding around it so that our students still get the same opportunities as their counterparts. Now, I'm gonna put a link in the chat. These are the critical technology areas deemed by the Department of Defense. So the idea here is that if these are the critical technology areas for the government and the private sector, that the private sector should also have jobs and careers being created in this as well. Okay. Now, I'm not going to talk about that bill, but I'm going to talk about the things that are going on more so with AI. Okay. So I think these tech companies and just everybody in general is pushing AI down our throats for something we didn't ask for. Okay. I think the reality of the situation from a classroom standpoint is to understand that AI requires more than just prompt engineering. When we're talking about tech literacy, you have to think about things like algorithmic awareness, data rights, adversarial thinking, tech governance. Okay. I don't know if you guys were following what's going on with the T app. Like, who was the creator of that, and what was their intended outcome? Okay. Universal computer science is still essential, but it has to evolve beyond syntax to include questions of power, purpose, and consequence. So we have to look at both sides to have that balance. And this AI hype right now that's going on is mirroring the coding hype when it first started. So right now, my view is that AI is being used to centralize power in the same way that the whole CS for all was capitalized on by big tech. Okay. So with that being said, if you're forcing these tools and integrating them into our students' lives when they don't have the skill set yet to think independently, you're shaping the way that you want them to think. You're shaping their output. Yes, an AI tutor situation sounds good, but what about the diversity of thought? And actually, an actual teacher sitting down with somebody can tell that student that, hey, okay, I see your point of view. There's more than one way to solve a problem. So I really feel like they're trying to essentially dumb down or decentralize that diversity of thought. So I don't know if I was going the right way here, but the big thing is just really looking at who wrote the model, who profits, who's protected, what's happening with the data, and just really getting us an opportunity to understand that holistically.
I love that. You can definitely see the teacher in you. That we got to know the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why. All the important W's. Brian, I love your perspective from the university education ecosystem.
Yeah. So it's something that I've been saying since I was a classroom teacher. First of all, Tiffany, I love all of that. Like, I think we need more knowledgeable, literate educators in order to have those debates so that the teacher voice is heard. Otherwise, big tech, government will dictate what happens in education. And I've always said since I was a classroom teacher that education is a social structure that is run like a business by politicians. And none of those three things have the same modus operandum. They don't have the same goals. And if our educators don't have the necessary literacy to advocate for themselves, we live in a I guess you can call us what do you say, where teachers can't have a union, a no union state. And that's intentional to mitigate the voice of the educators in this space, right? But we need the educators to have voice. But in order to have voice, they have to have knowledge. They have to know what is AI? What's happening when you lift under the hood, when you talk to Alexa or all of that. So they have to have this knowledge in order to be able to advocate and say, we don't want that AI, we need this AI. Was this AI trained on a representative model? If it wasn't, then I don't need it in my classroom. If there weren't enough women included in that model, then I have 50% girls in my room. This isn't going to serve all of my students, right? If the recognition software that you're using for that Scratch program doesn't recognize Black faces, then I don't need that software in my classroom because my students won't be able to use it and learn from it, right? So the educators have to have enough knowledge to do that. One of the projects that I work on, AI for Georgia, is we do a lot of professional development with teachers to help them learn what AI is and how it works. But that's just one part of literacy, right? Understanding what's happening under the hood. That's a computer science consideration. There's also the ed tech consideration. And everybody seems to be focused on this ed tech part, the tools that Tiffany was talking about. Are we gonna have Copilot in our schools? Are we gonna have Gemini in our schools? We a Google school, we a Microsoft school. And that's dictating what the teachers can use and have access to. Teachers need to be able to advocate for what's best for their students and what's best for their classroom, right? And there needs to be some transparency there. And then there's also this other side of policy. There are lots of levels of policy. There's district level policy, there's school level policy, there's classroom level policy. What am I doing with my kids in my classroom? And if your administrators aren't knowledgeable, then they can't create really, really good policy. They're just going to take cues from somebody who's going to tell them what to do. If your district folks aren't knowledgeable about what this is and how it works, then they're just going to take cues from somebody that tells them what to do. If your teachers aren't knowledgeable, they're just going to take cues from somebody telling them what to do. Yeah. We need to make sure everybody in this ecosystem, the students, the teachers, the administrators, the district leaders, everybody has a basic fundamental AI literacy, computer science awareness, so that we can all have an equitable conversation.
I love that. These comments are getting hot, talking about, how, not having that level of control, being able to have that voice is ultimately creating, someone, Tiffany here mentioned, it's creating a puppet, so I think that, is that what the system was designed to do in the first place? Who knows? But we'd love to kind of shift the conversation. We have about 5 minutes left. I want to kind of actually start talking about some of the interventions. And, when we look at the report card of where we are right now, John and Tiffany, Christina, you had mentioned that there's room for improvement. So we'd love to kind of talk to you, kick off with you both. John, starting with you, like what are some interventions or things that you might see that might help us get on the right track, if you will?
So from my perspective, and I'm speaking from the workforce development space, from our perspective, is of course teaching the science behind these things. I think a lot of times we focus when ChatGPT became a thing, we focus on, hey, let's be all great prompt engineers. But there's more to it than just being able to prompt, being able to create an LLM, being able to understand biases of these large language models that are created. How do we build something that encompasses, the right views and all that, and all those type of things? So understanding the science behind all that, like the ethics behind it, the construction, the building of all that. So I think, especially for what we're doing at Technologies of Color, we have been focused on AI for the last 6-7 months. We've done sessions on teaching people how to create their own LLM, nice. using their data and learning the science of it. So I think for us, instead of us just being, really good prompters or prompting, ChatGPT and these other platforms, is being able to create our own and being able to share that with the general public in terms of things that we build. So for us, we can't be consumers anymore. We have to be producers in this space. And so I feel a lot of times we're just there consuming what's been handed down to us, and we need to begin to become producers of this technology.
Couldn't agree more. Christina, what about yourself? Oh, did we lose Christina?
No, she's back.
Gotcha.
I'm back. I need some, I probably need some tech literacy myself because I keep pushing the button that kicks me out of this. It's a joy. So sorry, the interventions. The question was about interventions. I think so. In terms of interventions, I think we need to. It depends on an entire ecosystem. I think that we need to allow our educators and our teachers to be great at what they do, and stop kind of asking them to be all things for all students, and allow like our school systems to work with, to work alongside, our corporate and industry folks, our entrepreneurs, our community organizers, our policymakers. I think we need to work together. We have to work together towards the same solution in order for what we want to see in our youth to actually kind of manifest. It's not something that any one organization, any one person in the industry can do alone. And I think until we really prioritize that, it's going to be difficult to cross the finish line. I'm currently reading this book by, I think it's Jim Collins, Good to Great. And one of the things that he talks about in the book is, you know, within like businesses and industry, is industries that go from good to great. They understand this hedgehog concept, which allows them to think about what they're passionate about, what is their economic engine, like where can they make profit, and what can they be the best in the world at. And where, you know, a lot of industries and organizations kind of mess up is that they don't focus on what they can be the best in the world or what is their, you know, like their thing. They focus on trying to do all of the things, and you'll never actually accomplish anything well by doing that. And so I think that, you know, that's the intervention, is allowing like everyone, you know, all of our industries, all of our players to be the best at what they can be the best at, and trust them to be the best at what they're being the best at. Trust their voice, trust their perspective, trust their experience, in a way for us to collaborate and produce something really great.
I love that. I think that was a really great way for us to kind of start getting into the transition of the closing for this conversation. And I really love the resources that you shared as well, such as the book by James Collins that you mentioned. Also, shout out to the folks in the chat that have been dropping really great gems, a lot of great books here. I think we should start a book club at this point. I think that would be awesome. But as we're getting ready to wrap up, I would love for you, all the panelists that we have here, for you to share how people can get in touch with you. And in addition to that, if there are any things that they can support, whether they be initiatives that you have, upcoming events that you might be having, I'd love for you all to share that in the chat while we get ready to wrap up. But I just want to thank you all for your clarity, your honesty, and your leadership that helped us move forward with this in a very intentional way. To everyone listening, if you're here, you're part of something. You're part of the ATL Black Tech community, and we're building a space where we just don't want to talk about the change. We want to co-create it. And we hope that today challenge you to think bigger, act smarter, and push beyond just these surface level solutions. And if you want to stay in the loop, we encourage you to not only stay in the room of this community, if you will, but then also join us at our upcoming events and other opportunities for you to connect with us at the ATL Black Tech community. One way you can do that is through our ATL Black Tech community dinners. In August, on August 7th, actually, we have about 5 different dinners happening across Atlanta around the same time, between 6 and 8 p.m. You'll be able to meet myself and a number of other dinner hosts that we have, and have these really great conversations and build on really great potential solutions that we can all work towards together. In addition to that, I had the distinct pleasure and honor of meeting all of our panelists here through our community masterminds in the K through 20 education ecosystem. But we have those masterminds for the tech workforce as well as the startup and investor ecosystems, and we host those quarterly. So if you might be interested in joining us for the next one, I'll drop my email, but also encourage you to join us in the ATL Black Tech group so that you'll be able to get notifications when the next ones come up. Lastly, I just want to encourage you all to continue these conversations. I think that this is just a really great start. I really appreciate all of the candidness and us being able to kind of have a hard conversation. And so I just want to thank you all again for this time here for our panelists. Awesome. So without further ado, I suppose we'll get wrapped up here, but you all don't have to leave if you're on the panel, but for the folks that have joined us, make sure you share and continue to stay engaged with the ATL Black Tech community.